The Syncretion of Polarization and Extremes, Part 37. Polarization does not equal extreme. Armenia. Transposing Emblem by Hayek and Tonyan. The habit of aligning polarization and the discourse of extremes has come a long way. We've inherited the tradition of equating polarities and extremes. We consider it to be a given and do not challenge it. We do not engage in deep reflection of the subject. It has played a bad game with us. We've been deceived by the commensurability of polarity and extreme, wrongly thinking that it entails or implies equivalence, comparability, or correspondence. Now comes the irony. It breaks the code and transgresses the borders of convention, those conventions that were arbitrary or symbolic only, without featuring any motivation in allegory, emblem. It makes us depolarize the extreme. It makes us consider extremes as the new normal. We invert the content and boundaries. Now boundaries are the mainstream, and yesterday's content is at the outskirts, having to wade through the waves of mess in the absence of goodwill. It turns out that the normal failed to generate and impart goodwill. It turns out that the extremes pack a lot of excess hyperbolicity, and that they also cannot make use of all that surplus they now have to share with other extremes, as well as yesterday's mainstream. Irony heals. It becomes clear that already the work for the depolarization of extremes and de-extremization of poles invigorates, enlivens, and regenerates. It becomes clear that the profane dilemma of power versus choice produces extremes in a specific mode, one which polarizes the extremes. Extremes do not arise as polarities per se inherently. They are qualified as polarities post hoc. No one is seeking extremity proper. We all seek the expression of our free will. Extremity is what often results from that natural urge of ours by way of our own effort to contain and disenfranchise it. Polarization is performative in the nexus of discourse practice, whereas extreme seeking, so to say, is at the heart of our ontic being, including emancipation. And emotion, dynamics, peripatetics is associated with extremization. See the principle of least action in physics and the calculus of variance in mathematics. This sounds weird, doesn't it? Let's now turn to irony's twin brother, allegory, whose vehicle is the emblem, in simplified terms, of course. How do we handle the foregoing inversion? How do we handle, in particular, the stress and frustration of the mainstream when it faces things turned upside down? It neither has the skills for nor an understanding of what is new. It lacks the right vantage point. The frames and assumptions have changed. Problemizations that used to be there for decades and even centuries no longer exist and are being replaced by problemizations of their negative spaces, i.e. of what used to be considered under the spotlight, but was eventually found to be a complete white space, space that was completely overlooked. And that space is the space of allegory. But allegory consumerized, brought to masses, if you like. Trivialized allegory no longer works on the global scale, if it ever worked. How allegory materializes is itself ironic. Allegory materializes from those same extremes. It results from the emergence of too many extremes, and we cannot keep up with the pace, polarizing them as they are born at a too high rate. Rates of processes govern the process, as non-equilibrium thermodynamics, synergetics, teach us. In other words, our capacity to polarize extremes is limited in terms of our throughput, fortunately for us. The extremes gather into hypermolar ensembles that over time tend to self-organize. Fragments organized by transposition into emblems, following Walter Benjamin. Finally, how do they do it? When initially polarized extremes are thrown into an abyss, into no hope, into being left within their melancholy, allegory rises exactly from the melancholic disposition, following Walter Benjamin. Allegory marries nature and history. Allegory induces natural history. Allegory gathers from the polydisperse multiplicity of extremes that peripatetically wander and self-organize into bodies of consciousness. Now, one feature or ingredient of that process is left. That is modulation. Extremes interact with each other. They connect to each other easily because at that stage, they do not have cores, only peripheries or long tails, and those peripheries of theirs, being fugacious or peripatetic, connect to each other readily. One too many connectivity for each converts translates to modulation for it. A web of diagrammaticity forms that helps by acting as chora for them each to modulate and form selves and identities. Modulation and diagrammaticity are intimately interconnected. The formation of cores or kernels of identity follow from it by way of condensation and the like. So extremes, or peripatetics, are the epitomic social actants. They take life from each other virtually by their virtues. In such settings, there is no outer or detached body of appraisal or qualification that can polarize the extremes. Now all are extremes, and it never enters anybody's mind to alienatingly label themselves or their peers' polarity. The agonizing, beautified game of cross-alienation is over now. The misadventure of alienation is succeeded by fraternity with diversity, each element of which is an extreme. All are extremes that face each other in a concave, caring and embracing space that all thus make up. Geometrically, such concave or compressive space of exact extremes makes up the ideal topology for the expression of free and goodwill. It is the receptacle of chorus space voiced by ancient Greeks. It receives everything, cares for everyone, erases and produces anew, yet by perceiving the traces. The memory pool it maintains is accessible and shared by all extremes, or extremes now.